Welcome. I'm Doug Morgan, and you're listening to Uncommon Sense, where we hunt for the truth in the topics you're not supposed to talk about, Christianity and politics. What is the purpose of the public school system? Well, it's to teach children how to do math and write well and read what they need to. An educated society is so very important to a thriving culture. So, how are our schools doing with this kind of charge? Well, last year, 39% of fourth grade students and 28% of eighth grade students performed at or above NAEP proficiency in mathematics. And reading and writing scores are almost identical. If you owned a business and your employees had that kind of dismal success rate, you'd fire them all. Instead, our schools are more concerned about indoctrinating our kids with leftist ideology than teaching them how to live in the real world. But times, they are a-changin'. And from ABC News, Devin Dyer writes this. He says, when public school teachers return to the classrooms this fall, they will confront a new legal landscape that has given parents expanded veto power over certain aspects of a child's education. A sweeping constitutional interpretation issued last month from the U.S. Supreme Court recognizes a fundamental right under the First Amendment to opt out from classroom lessons that may pose what is called a, quote, very real threat of undermining, unquote, sincerely held religious beliefs. This is great news. It has school districts and their attorneys nationwide scrambling to review curriculum for possible conflicts and fine-tune protocols for when and how students can be excused from certain material. Here's a quote. It marks a significant challenge for public schools education nationwide. This is what Montgomery County, Maryland Board of Education, which lost the case, by the way, said in a recent statement on the decision. The board has been sued by a group of Muslim and Jewish and Christian parents after it refused, get this, to permit families to opt out their children from exposure to storybooks with LGBTQ themes. This is part of the problem. They believe the public school system believes that they are the experts and they should know better, and it's their kids and it's parents that get in the way. Here's a quote. The right of parents to direct the religious upbringing of their children would be an empty promise if it did not follow those children into the public school classroom. That's what Justice Samuel Alito, one of the best judges on the court, that's what he wrote in the majority opinion. The ruling effectively requires schools to notify parents in advance of any classroom concepts that might be contrary to a particular religion and to accommodate requests to provide alternative instruction. Now, Sarah Parshall Perry, a former U.S. Department of Education attorney and current vice president of the conservative advocacy group Defending Education, called it a clear directive to districts. Quote, in making the decision, the High Court expanded an earlier religious liberty in school case Wilson versus Yoder. And this is what Perry wrote in a blog post. And she said, in that 1972 decision, the court held that Amish families could opt their children out of compulsory education past 8th grade because continuing in school longer would be a violation of their religious beliefs, unquote. Now, while religious rights advocates hailed the ruling as common sense, and some civil rights groups, educators, and parents fear it now undermines the very foundation of the public education system. Okay. Quote, This decision could have a chilling effect, said Becky Pringle, president of the National Education Association. Of course she thinks that. The NEA is the nation's largest union of public school teachers. And she said, and this could lead to more educators self-censoring, good, shelving books and lessons, ones that shouldn't be there anyway, and preventing some already marginalized students from being seen and acknowledged. No, they'll all be seen and they'll all be acknowledged. Some school officials have privately worried about a Pandora's box of administrative burdens that sweeping opt-out rights now present, and said they may consider preemptively removing content from the curriculum entirely in order to avoid confrontations with parents. Oh, well, that's good news. Take it out of there. That stuff does not need to be in there. Quote, I'm sure there will be more parents that are going to exercise this right, said Jim Walsh, a Texas lawmaker who represents school boards and is a member of the National School Attorneys Association. Federal courts have already fielded numerous disputes in recent years over religious objections to classroom lessons, including faith-based opposition to teaching women's empowerment, okay, the theory of evolution, co-ed physical education, and celebration of Halloween. Okay. Quote, there are religions that oppose medical science, surgery, psychiatry, let's see here, interracial marriage, monogamy, women's suffrage, the right to gay people to marry, and so on, said Representative Jamie Raskin, who's a Democrat from Minnesota, and an attorney and law professor. Let's bring out the extremisms, right? Quote, all of them will now be able to flood the courts with claims that particular secular curricular teachings and books offered offend their sincere values, and their children should not be exposed to the offensive doctrines. Okay, well, if parents don't, the parents have the right to choose what their kids are taught. That should be a very common sense parental right. Well, to evaluate the claims, frontline educators could be put in a tough spot, they claim. Quote, school administrators will have to become experts in a wide range of religious doctrines in order to predict in advance whether a parent may object to a particular text, lesson plan, or school activity in contrary to their religious beliefs. This is what Justice Sonia Sotomayor, in her dissent in the case, the result will be chaos. Okay, allowing the parents to have their kids opt out of such ideology is not going to create chaos. Walsh offered a more sanguine appraisal based on the experience of Texas, which he had an expansive statewide opt-out available to parents for 30 years. Parents, quote, this is a quote, parents can opt out of anything they have a religious or moral objection to, and the school has to accommodate that. It has not caused significant problems, is what Walsh said. And why would it? Really? One reason the impact has been muted, he said, is that kids are frequently embarrassed when their parents do this. As for concerns that schools might self-censor material so as to avoid conflicts with parents, well, Walsh said it is a likely possibility. Quote, Sonia Mera predicts a lot of litigation, and I think she's probably right about that. But I think if districts adopt a policy of transparency, that would be nice, and allow opt-out with some limitations on that, I think that's going to go a long way for reducing that. So, yeah, this is very good news, and it's just simply common sense. Parents have the right to be able to direct what their kids learn. And it's not the public school system that has that right. And I love this opinion piece by Ryan Stanley He's a researcher, a research director actually for defending education. We just talked about, and he he holds a master's degree in elementary education and has over a decade of classroom experience in both public and private schools. So he really knows what he's talking about. And he says, another day, another far left street protest. It gets hard to keep up with the current thing as activists switch out causes like the average person changes underwear. Last month's pro-Palestine protest is yesterday's anti-immigration and customs enforcement or ICE protests. And it's today's pro-Iran protest. But the issue is never the issue. The issue is the revolution. Even more concerning is how K-12 schools have been infiltrated by organizations to serve as fertile recruiting and training grounds for the next generation of far-left activists. Leveraging ethnic studies courses as an access point, these outside groups hide behind history and culture to advance their radical ideology and recruit students and staff into their ranks. School districts, in order to comply with California's Assembly Bill 101, back in 2021 it was passed, which mandates that students in the class of 29 through 30, 2029 and 2030 complete one semester of ethnic studies and have been hiring far left organizations to assist in developing and implementing these course curriculums, as well as running professional development trainings and conferences for teachers. For example, an early July ethnic studies conference in Arizona featured a, quote, pre-institute field day on the border, which includes visiting a desert surveillance tower with local organizers. The participants will examine how the same technologies are used against Palestinians, unquote. Yeah. On May 13th of this year, Stockton Unified School Districts Board approved spending $28,000 to send 10 clinic study educators to attend the Institute. One of the Institute's sessions, entitled Education as a Front, a Weapon, and a Tool, includes panelists such as the chair of the Association of Raza Educators, or ARE, and co-founder of Liberated Ethics Studies Model Curriculum Consortium, which is the LESMC, and the director of Arab Resource and Organizing Center, or AROC. According to the description on Instagram, the panel of educators and organizers will share their tactics on how we can force, again, this is their quote, how we can join forces by highlighting their work in the streets and in the schools and help us identify critical fronts for cross-movement solidarity, unquote. Both ARE and AROC openly engage in far-left street activism. ARE's Instagram is filled with protest propaganda, including a February 23 of 2023 post which shows members of ARE following ICE agents to their home base, as they put it. Additionally, AROC helped organize the blockade of the Bay Bridge in 2023 and boasts about shutting down the port of Oakland last year in support of Palestine. In 2023, San Francisco Unified School District approved a 4-year agreement with AROC to provide, quote, workshops in classrooms related to leadership development and cultural empowerment. AROC is a fiscal project of the Tides Foundation. Not only are teachers being trained to advance far-left activism, but the ideology has been embedded in ethnic study curriculums, including how students are graded. On June 18th of this year, Carlsbad Unified School District Board approved a year-long elective ethnic studies course, which includes units on studying and engaging in activism. Grading rubrics included in the draft document revealed that students are assessed on how well they advocate for, and this is their words, justice in speech and perspective, unquote, and recognize, again, quote, equity as essential, unquote. In other words, students are taught to identify oppression and injustice, critical consciousness type stuff, and to act on it. Critical consciousness, a primary concept in ethnic studies, teaches students how to view everything using an oppressor versus oppressed binary lens. The goal is to get the youth to constantly seek out new social justice causes to which they can attach themselves. For example, just 2 years ago, a 2023 Paro Valley Unified School District Board presentation reveals how the district integrated into its ethnic literature and studies course an ethnic studies praxis story plot that replaces a traditional plot diagram with one steeped in critical consciousness. Students are taught to read stories in a circular fashion, moving from exposing the problem and recognizing the oppressed and the oppressed classes to resistance and revolution and how to apply the lessons to their own social justice activism. Instead of seeking out meaningful resolutions and solutions, these courses, such as in Carlsbad and Paro Valley schools, create perpetual social justice activists who bounce from one cause to the next in an effort to tear down the oppressive system and foment revolution. While far-left ethnic studies consultants make millions in consulting fees to advance their anti-Western civilization ideology in schools, they are simultaneously turning K-12 students into the next generation of campus and street revolutionaries. As liberated ethnic studies expands its tentacles across the country, parents, board members, administrators, teachers, and policymakers must grapple with this destructive ideology masquerading as culture and history. The metastasis of these far left recruiting and training programs in our K-12 schools must be stopped. American families deserve schools that teach children to read and to write and to do math at the highest of standards, not indoctrination into social justice activism. And I would say that we are seeing so many more parents that are taking their children out of public schools for reasons very much like this one, and placing them into private schools or even homeschooling them. In fact, even public school teachers are doing that now. This comes from teenieschool.com, and it was entitled "Why I'm a Public School Teacher but a Private School Parent." I found it very fascinating. As she writes, she says, "I'm a public school teacher. I love my job. I love my students. I love my school, and I'm sending my kids to a private school anyway. I know this is going to sound hypocritical, but this is one of the best decisions I've ever made. As a parent and as a teacher, yes, it's going to sound a lot like a chief telling you that they never, I'm sorry, a chef telling you that they never eat at their own restaurant. I've heard plenty of that from friends and neighbors, even some family members. But you know who I never heard those kinds of comments from? My fellow public school teachers. They understand perfectly why this kind of decision is made. And it's made a lot more frequently than most would ever expect. But we'll get into more of that in just a moment, she says. For now, though, just understand that these decisions are never made by teachers because they don't like the schools they work for or they don't trust the public education. if that was the case, the odds are pretty good most of them would no longer be teaching in public capacities. They would be doing something else. No, public school teachers that send their children to private schools do so because they understand how important education is. I know, sounds a little weird, but they understand how transformative the right education can be. And the right education is not public school system because you're sending your kid to private school. Mm-hmm. And they also understand the limitations and heartbreaking shortcomings of most public school experiences. I would agree. Here's why I'm a public school teacher, but a private school parent. Number one, this decision isn't rare. About 11% of all parents in the United States choose to send their kids to private schools. And while many of these schools have a religious affiliation, nearly 80% of them, the overwhelming majority of parents in America are choosing to send their kids to private schools do so for the educational opportunities to those organizations that those organizations offer. What's even more interesting, though, is that public school teachers are twice as likely to send their children to private schools than the national average. Yes, twice. A little more than 21% of public school teachers have children K-12 currently enrolled in private schools right now. The only group that has a larger percentage of parents sending their children to private schools is members of Congress. This decision, while hypocritical appearing on the surface, perhaps, is nowhere as uncommon as one might think. Another study polled public school teachers with school-aged children and asked them if they had the opportunity and the means to send their children to a private school, found that nearly 90% would do so in a blink of an eye. Again, this is not an indictment of the public school system. I don't know. Sounds like it to me, but these teachers are people that deeply love education, are serious and committed to helping shape the lives of young people, and are doing their best in public school setting to deliver the best possible education experience they can. Okay. At the same time, she says, these public school teachers, however, know better than anyone else just how hard it is to succeed away public school educations. The budgets for these public schools are always under attack, forcing schools to look for non-traditional means of funding or to cut programs, cut teachers, or cut resources. That's not conducive to building an organization that delivers a true top-tier education. On top of that, most parents would agree that the overwhelming majority of public schools today are more like child care facilities than anything else. Money for textbooks, money for technology, and money for other educational aids just isn't there when there are so many other organizations in town or districts that need funding too. Now, let me stop for a second. Our public education system spends about $20,000 a year per student. Let me say that again. Our public school system, on average, spends about $20,000 a year per student. And that's not enough? How are the private schools then doing it for less? Well, she goes on to say, every parent wants to make sure that their children get the best possible education. Sometimes that's just not going to happen in public schools. And who better to diagnose the situation than a teacher working in the facility? Well, there are a myriad of reasons why public school teachers choose to send their children to private schools, some more compelling than others. And at the end of the day, though, it's all about making sure that children get a world-class education, something that every single child deserves. I agree. How about greater choice and flexibility? One reason a lot of parents choose to take advantage of private school opportunities is because of the myriad of choice and flexibility these kinds of organizations provide. With more than 35,000 private schools, yes, there's over 35,000 private schools in the United States, currently serving north of 6 million students. between the grades of kindergarten and 12th grade, private schools make up about 25% of all the schools in the country, even though they only enroll about 10% of the students. This means that there are almost unlimited private school opportunities to take advantage of, and the odds are good that many of these organizations will fit a public school teacher budget or have scholarships and funding packages that make it more accessible. Parents are also able to search for private school programs that have values that align with their own. Public schools are an amalgamation of a region and its values, to be sure, but it's hard to impress some of these values on students when they get so little time with teachers, real focused one-on-one time. Private schools do not have that problem. Well, then maybe there's a problem with the way we teach public schools children. She says many have strict dress codes, rules, and regulations, and the ethos about them that provides a lot of extra structure to the day than public schools might. Some parents find this to be overbearing, and perhaps some of them are, but it's hard to argue with the results. And I would agree. If you look at the results of private schools, children, and homeschool children, they are far, far better results than the public school system. She says the fact that so many private schools are built around the idea of open lines of communication between students, parents, and teachers, the three cornerstones of the quality education, is a major influence behind public school teachers making this decision. Yes, maybe public schools should strive to have better communication between students, parents, and teachers. She says regular parent-teacher conferences, social events that get the entire family and facility to know one another, and number of regular initiatives to get parents more actively involved in their students' educational lives happen with more frequency in private schools than they do in public ones. All of this helps to get everyone on board, pulling in the same direction and investing in the success of students in the private school itself. It is not the public schools that they're devoid of these kinds of initiatives, or that they are uninterested in getting parents to be more actively involved in the education of their children. It all comes back to the problem of scale in public schools. Again, I disagree with this. I disagree with her here because I do believe that that's part of the problem. They don't want the parents involved. They don't. If they wanted the parents involved, then they would have programs. They would have the ability to have their kids opt out of objectionable materials. But it took the Supreme Court, as we just talked about, in order to solidify that. And she goes on, she says, when you have an organization designed to teach as many kids as possible, where there are obviously going to be some corners cut and some shortcuts taken that just don't happen when you scale things down the way a private school will. It's not at all uncommon for private school teachers to provide their own personal contact information to parents and encouraging them to reach out whenever they have questions about how things are progressing. Yeah, and they also don't have the attitude that these are their kids because they're the teachers. It's almost impossible to find that in the public schools, she says. And another huge benefit of moving forward with private schools is that the truly tailored learning programs they provide each individual student, private school curriculums can be custom tailored in a way that public schools cannot. Why not? Why not? Because, she says, because they are almost always smaller, more flexible, and better funded than they can also devote their cash and capital as well as their teaching resources to what students and parents are most interested in as far as their education is concerned. This custom tailored education track, especially starting at the young age, has considerable advantages over the more traditional public school system. Children aren't lost in the shuffle at a private school the way that they might be with the larger classes and the larger enrollment either. Again, they aren't underfunded. the private school gets less per student almost every time than the public school system. Don't say that public schools are underfunded, so that's the problem. And she says, speaking of that, personalizing mentoring, the private schools are almost always intentionally much smaller than public schools, and all in an effort to provide a better and more personalized education to the students that are attending. According to information publicized by the National Center of Education Statistics in 2017, fully 87% of private schools in the United States had enrollment sizes lower than 300 students. Again, it's not about class size, but it's about how they're being taught, the attitude in which they're being taught with, and what they're being taught. You cannot focus on DEI, climate change, and social justice and expect the kids to read and to write and to do math. They are charged with getting the children ready for their adult life in society by teaching them to read, to write, and to do math and science and that type of thing. And instead, they're teaching them other things. They're teaching them to be activists and revolutionaries. And parents have had enough. They're fed up with it. They're taking their kids out of that system, and they're having to pay extra to send them to a private school, or they're teaching them at home. Homeschooling is just exploding. And people are finding out it's not that hard. It's not, the support structure is so much better than it ever was before, because there's so many kids that are being homeschooled and things now. I mean, this is what parents are doing because they are concerned with their kids and their education. They love their children and they want the best for them. And I would love to hear from you on. I would love to hear what you have to say when it comes to our school systems getting an F and what is happening because of it. And you can always do that at uncommonsensepodcast.com. And you can always go to our YouTube page. Would love to have you like and share. It always helps us. And thank you for listening. This podcast is a production of Morganite Communications.